Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. Please note that this episode contains depictions and stories of siblings lost by homicide, suicide, and/or domestic violence. Some people may find these stories activating, triggering, and/or disturbing. Please see our show notes for additional resources and to understand the full content of the episode.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have, again, another incredible guest with me. Her name is Lori Luna, and we have a whole lot in common. She has also lost a brother to homicide. Lori, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to have you here. It's always bittersweet, right, when we meet siblings that have lost siblings, especially in a similar fashion. But there's such a deep connection that happens so quickly.
Yeah.
So, Lori, what I would love for you to do for us is kind of just jump in and tell us a little bit about Brian, who he was when he was here physically with us, and your relationship, and kind of paint that picture. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for having me, Maya. This is really
My pleasure.
special. Any chance I have to talk about my brother, I'm going to grab. So, May 26th of 2022, we lost Brian to a homicide. And it's been very recent. But I'm at a place now where I want to start remembering him for how he lived and not how he died. So this was a really great opportunity to talk about him. But Brian was he was 47 when he passed. He he was a very funny, very quick-witted human being. He was kind. He said yes sir and yes ma'am, and we're not from the South. We're from Southern California. He just was he was a gentleman. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Brian was a little person. He was born an achondroplasia dwarf. And he had a pretty rough emotionally, his life. Because people think that if you're short, you're dumb. And I'm 8 years older than he. And so I was his protector. You know, I mean, he was born in 1975. So people didn't really know enough. Like Peter Dinklage, there was no Game of Thrones. There was no Peter Dinklage, the actor, who could,
Right.
really shed some light on that. Look, he's just short. That's all.
Right.
And so, I mean, there were times literally when I would get in fights to protect my brother.
Oh my gosh, you are that sassy older sister like
I
I
was.
am. Oh my gosh.
Totally, right?
I love that. Yeah.
And I think that's also been one of the hard parts, is that I wasn't there to protect my brother. That really, really has been something that I've worked through a lot with my coach, because I decided to go through a therapy process a little bit different. So I found a grief coach, and I've really been working on that, and so what happened to him was, at some point, he was found at 5:26 a.m. on the 26th of May. He probably passed away around 2:00 in the morning. The person that killed him was a stranger to us, and I'm 100% sure it was a stranger to my brother. There were some drugs and alcohol involved. We all make bad choices. And this particular person, from what we know, it's hard to tell because what I call, I can't use bad words on here. So what I call the POS, he pushed my brother. He either knocked him out in advance, But he pushed him out of the car and he was unconscious. And then he ran over him with his own car and he stole
Wow.
his car. So
Wow.
he died of acute asphyxiation.
Which for anybody who doesn't know what that is, can you define that for us? Because
Yeah,
just to make
it
sure everyone knows. Yes, Lori.
it
Mhm.
means that his chest was basically crushed by his own car and he couldn't breathe.
Right.
And so it was, I mean, when we finally got that detail, that obviously was challenging. But at the beginning, we didn't know what was going on because, like you say in so many of your interviews and so many of your own episodes, I I got the call.
Yes. The moment we never forget, right? The
Uh,
call. So who called you? Who
my
gave
dad
you that call?
called. My dad
Mm,
called because the police showed up at his doorstep
yeah.
and it was two detectives and one officer. And at the time, they thought it was a hit and run because my brother's or a carjacking because my brother's car had been stolen.
Right.
His wallet had been stolen, his phone had been stolen. And so the thought was it was a carjacking. Um
Which
because
I could naturally see that being a
right,
thought, right, in the beginning. Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
And then I had to do what you had to do and I had to call my mother. You had to call your father. I had to call my mom and like nobody should have to make these calls.
No.
I've decided that nobody and I don't know. Now my phone rings and I'm like, what's the matter? Like if somebody doesn't text me and say I'm gonna call you, I panic the minute my phone rings.
I have chills with you saying that right now, Lori, because it's interesting today. I was sharing with you, I was at an event this morning. We both
Mhm.
do events for a living. I love
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Love that we have that connection. That's a positive connection, right?
Positive connection.
We'll take the win. And my very close girlfriend that I talk about on seasons who lost her mother 2 weeks before I lost my brother.
Mhm.
She whenever she will call me and if I can't answer or if I don't answer, she'll always text me. She's like, "Hey, just wanting to chat, just wanting." I mean, we're besties, but she'll always say, "Not an emergency. Everything's
Not an
okay," because
emergency.
we have that understanding, you know? So like I instantly went to that when you said that because
Yep.
it's something that no one else will understand other than, us and all of you guys listening who have gotten the call, which most of us have or had
Yeah.
to give the call.
Or had to
Mhm.
give the call. Yeah, and that was pretty awful. That was pretty awful. It was awful to hear my father and his anguish, and then it was awful because we didn't know. I didn't, and my parents both live inside of 10 miles of me. So, because my parents are divorced, like your parents. We have a lot of common.
We really
um,
do, Lori.
we're
Little did we know we have so much in
I
common.
know.
So they contacted or they showed up at your mother's
No,
house
they
is what
showed
you're
up at my
saying.
father's house,
Father's house.
and my
Okay,
dad
got
called me, and then I had to call my
you
mom.
called your mom. Got it.
And
Okay.
then I went and picked her up, and we drove to my dad's,
Got it.
and that the police were there, and, I mean, it was just this doesn't happen to us. This happens to, quote, "other people,"
Right.
I mean, I used to
True.
watch Dateline. This happens to other people. I don't watch any of that stuff anymore, I can't. Um, but this happens to other people. This doesn't happen to my family. It doesn't happen
Mhm.
to your family. It doesn't happen to our collective families, and yet here we are. Happening to our family. And it just was very surreal. And I'm sure, I know you've had to deal with the police and you just wait, what? What are you talking? This like your brain just can't process this.
Mhm.
And that's how it was for us. Like I just felt like this doesn't make any sense. Cause see, my brother's car was his freedom. As long as he had gas and a cell phone with a charge, he was that
Cruising.
was his yeah, he was out and about visiting his friends and doing what he was doing,
Yeah.
and so to hear someone hit him with his own car and then his car was stolen, it's like it had to be a carjacking, but it wasn't. It
Did
wasn't.
you feel like when you got that information Like, did it feel wrong right away to you?
Oh,
Were
yeah.
you like, "Yeah, yeah." I feel like that's sister or brother intuition, right? When
Yeah.
we're that connected, it felt wrong to you.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, none of this is making sense.
Mhm.
This doesn't make sense. And, at this point, both my parents go into this sort of comatose. And I'm very much a type A. You have to be with what we do. I'm the
Totally. We're event planners. Oh my god. It's in our blood.
exactly.
Yes.
I'm the eldest sibling.
Yes. Me too.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And what do? We take care of things. It's like, I think you said it in your first season, your first episode, first season, you were going after you needed to know the no. You needed to know what happened.
Yep.
And that's the mode I went into is problem solving. I became the point of contact with the detective because honestly,
I
the truth
relate to
was my
that.
parents couldn't function.
Right. And so we take that on, and I find that you know there's a lot of it's interesting because as I've done so many of these episodes and as I do lives and talk to so many siblings, and now unfortunately you're in the community too, Lori, so you're going to continue to hear this as well, but I'm sure you've already heard so much about it. It's as the oldest, it's kind of like the natural born order that it happens. But there's very often siblings that also take on that role too, depending on the capacity for other siblings. So it's just interesting to hear different stories. But we definitely have that in common. It's a mode
Yeah.
that we've had to go into for so much of our lives. So
Yeah.
that clicks on even in such a traumatic situation. So it's very interesting to me that this happened to you as well, but also not surprising.
Yeah. 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 It
So
was
when you guys were connecting and all of that,
yeah.
and this was all happening, were you sitting in, your like, where did you go down to the precinct? Did you sit in a home? Like, talk us through that a little bit so we can kind of
Yeah.
paint the picture. Yeah.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you a bereaved sibling, a forgotten mourner, or as we call it here on the Surviving Siblings podcast, a surviving sibling? Well, I am too. My name is Maya, and I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I created this show for siblings just like you to help you along your grief journey. And now I've created even more resources to help you along this lifelong journey. I wrote the grief guide for the surviving siblings so that you and I can travel along this journey together. Within the guide, it has prompts to help you with a validation exercise that helps you validate your feelings of grief. We also talk about the stages of grief, and we also have a timeline exercise that helps you journal as you continue along your grief journey. I share tips throughout the guide on my personal grief journey as well and what worked for me. You can find this guide on Amazon.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And of course, you can visit our incredible website, thesurvivingsiblings.com. In addition to finding the grief guide, you'll find merchandise that supports you as the surviving sibling, as well as our show. You'll also find our support group that meets every month, our Ask Me Anything Mondays, and so much more. So make sure to visit thesurvivingsiblings.com for more information, and don't forget to order your grief guide today.
Yeah. So like I said, that the two detectives and the police officer, they showed up at my dad's and we were sitting at my dad's kitchen table and they were telling us what they knew at the time. It was a Thursday. And then my mom was telling what she knew, and my dad was talking about what he knew because everybody's trying to piece together the last time they talked to Brian. And uh he was on my phone plan. And so I'm like, "Oh, let me," because they said they couldn't find his phone. I'm like, "Oh, let me see if he had given me access." Of course he hadn't. Um, so that to this day, that phone is still in the ether, as his wallet is and all of that other stuff. But it just it just felt like I was kind of hovering above watching everything. It didn't feel real. And they're saying all these words are coming out, but nothing is making sense. And I mean, I understand the words, I'm comprehending the words, but what they're saying, I'm like, no, there's more to this. There's something else, and I don't know what it is. And it was the next day when the detective called me and said his department would be handling it, and his card says homicide division. And that took on a
And this was a
whole
different detective than you were
same
sitting
detective.
at the
No, same
table.
detective.
Same detective, but he had actually said, "Okay, I am taking this on now. This
He
is
called the
a
next day.
homicide." Wow. That's a lot of confirmation in a short amount of time, though, in my opinion, when you are like, "Something's not right," and then to receive that, is
Right.
that how
It
you
was very
felt? Or
fast. Yeah,
yeah.
it was very
Yeah.
fast. But then what I felt was, okay, what do you know about this guy? Well, they won't tell you. I don't know if you remember this. They won't tell me.
Totally, oh, you're giving me chills. It
Yeah.
is like I don't know if you heard this or recall this from my season, or if you guys do, but the 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 detective not the detective that got assigned to my case, who ended up being quite corrupt,
Mm.
um, actually referred to these guys as upstanding
Gentlemen.
gentlemen,
Yes, I
and
do
it
recall
disgusts
that.
me to this day. I've had to do a lot of work on that. So, yeah, they won't tell you a whole lot.
Right, because it's an active case.
Exactly.
And I was like, you gotta tell me something, because you know what? Here's the thing. I was gonna go take care of business myself.
Mhm.
And I don't know how I I was like, once I found out a little bit of information about where this all happened, I started driving around. I started driving around, but then at the same time, I had to tell myself, stop doing this, because I couldn't be the reason that something went wrong.
Right.
I was so nervous that if I did something that would jeopardize getting, at the time, I called justice. Now I call punishment, because there is no justice. Our legal system, which we can talk about, but the legal system is completely unjust, if you ask me,
Yep.
you know? But kind of like you, I was okay, get the facts, get the facts.
Mhm.
And there were so many things that started happening, even though they wouldn't tell me who the person was, and they wouldn't tell me what they knew. Like, they found my brother's car the next day. And so then it was impounded because this person had abandoned the car. So then
Interesting.
I'm I'm the one that went and got my brother's personal belongings out of it once it was released by the police. And that was a whole flood of emotions, because at the time I didn't have a lot of the details, so I didn't know.
Right.
And, you know, I knew my brother had been hit by this car, but I didn't know like all the specifics. And so there I am inside of his car getting the belongings this person didn't steal, and just literally buckling
Yeah. Yeah. What
because
did you know prior to going there? I mean, like, everything that you've shared right now, was there anything else that you knew? Because I feel like you've said so eloquently already, like, we just go into this, like, gotta make it happen mode,
yeah.
gotta take care of it mode, but, I mean, did they tell you where the car was left? Did they tell you how far away it was from where he was? Did you know any of that yet, or was everything just still such a fog and up in the air?
The car was found about, I want to say about 20 miles west rather, of where my brother was murdered. Um, and at the time, my head was saying he got hit by the car. So that was different than being run over by a car,
Mm, totally.
right? So, going to the car to get whatever personal belongings were still there, this was the weapon.
It
You
was.
know,
It was,
it's
it is.
it is
Yeah.
the weapon.
Mhm.
and we ended up forfeiting the car to the impound lot and said they could sell it. What do we don't want it. We don't want the weapon. That would be like handing somebody the gun, like you don't want it,
Oh my god, exactly, I
you
connect with
know?
that, and I'm sure all of
Yeah.
you who, have, whether it's a knife, a gun, or whatever it is, right,
Yeah.
car, whatever it
Yeah.
is, you don't want I mean, I would never even wanna see that, right? I
No.
would never even so my heart, again, just completely goes out to you, but what's interesting to me, and a question I have for you
Mhm.
in this, Lori, is was that taken in, though, for evidence? Because the
Yes.
car was okay, so t can you share a little bit about that? And
Right.
then we'll come back to the evolution of the story, but yeah,
Yeah.
because 'cause I'm curious about that, I'm sure all of you guys listening will be curious about this as well, or are curious, because if it goes to the impound,
It went
then
to the police
okay,
garage first. So
okay,
it was located, and the police had put some sort of, you know, I don't know, whatever the APB, be on the lookout, whatever they do for cars,
right, right,
and so when it was towed, it went straight to the police's, lab, and so by the time it was released to us, there were, like, little flags in different places,
and you saw that.
and I saw that, and I thought, "See, none of this is still like, why what?" You know?
Mhm,
I still don't know what those things mean. I
mhm,
will I will never know what those things mean, and I took pictures of the car, not knowing at the time the exact way that my brother had been killed. Again, I thought he had been hit by the car. I didn't, you know what I mean? And that's
I do,
so it I think if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have taken pictures of that car, obviously.
sure,
Um, but there was no way my parents could go. And my
sure.
best friend was in town from Chicago because she got on a plane and flew out here. And, she was sitting in my car waiting for me, and I took a couple of boxes because I didn't know what would be in there, and there were just, a couple of things that he had in his car that I wanted to make sure I took, but I don't know, it just in hindsight, I think I was just sort of in a zombie mode. I was just getting through. I was just checking off boxes,
Mhm.
get his things, write an obituary, write a eulogy, all those things that you have to do. And it took me a while to kind of process it
Mhm.
and what it really, when you find out what it really means and thinking, oh my God, I was right there with the weapon. Startling.
That is such a moment, right?
Yeah.
When you look back on that,
Yeah.
I can't even I know the site where my brother was killed, but
Hmm.
fortunately I've never had to see the gun, but it's a very similar sentiment where you're
Hmm.
just like it's very eerie.
Hmm.
And when you're in that zone like you're describing, Lori, you're just kind of disassociate a little bit.
Hmm.
And it's not
Perfect word.
necessarily right, and it's not necessarily in a negative way, it's in a
Mm.
way so that you can survive, but also so that you can execute things for your family, and you can
Yeah.
really be there for your family,
Yeah.
and, this is not something that I would ever wish on anyone because it's not something that we come into this world as a child, you're not expecting to do that. You're expecting like your parents to protect you and provide for you and all of that, and regardless of age, right? And we know the natural progression of life. Like one day we'll take care of our parents, and like
Right.
that's whole that thing. But this kind of stuff throws a wrench in the entire ecosystem of a family, and that's where it
Absolutely.
gets different. Yeah,
I mean, my brother and I were supposed to finish this life together.
completely
I wasn't supposed to become an only child.
right. Which is a whole other thing, right? Because
Yeah.
we talk about this a lot in our groups, Lori. We talk about this a lot. I mean, just in sibling loss in general, right? We talk about it on the
Mhm.
show, but let's hone into this for just a second, and then I want
Okay.
to continue with Brian's story. But
Yeah.
you just keep bringing up some really good points. You didn't expect to be an only child, and this is something that I have a lot of you guys reach out to me and say, like, I'm now the only sister. I'm now the oldest and I was the youngest, or like I'm now a middle, or I'm now a this, all these different, changes.
Right.
And for me, I'm still the oldest. I have two other sisters, but we don't have a brother physically here in this world anymore because I still believe in the spiritual aspect. That's just my own belief. But that was an ecosystem change for us in the family, along with a lot of the drama. And
Mm.
for you, you're an only child now, but you're not an only child.
But I'm
You
not.
have a
Mhm.
brother. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really, really good point to drive home. So how have you, pulled that through as you continue to process this loss? Because you are not an only child. You will
I'm
always be the oldest. You will always have a brother, right? But I think
right.
sometimes that messes with people's minds and they're like, I'm an only child now, or I'm the youngest now, or I don't have a brother, I don't have a sister now, right? And that's not true, but how do
No.
we work through that when they're not physically here with us anymore? I'm curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy.
Mhm.
Um, but I still say when I speak about him, I still talk about him in the present tense.
Guilty. Me
Be
too.
because he will always be my brother,
Amen.
right?
So true.
He's just not here in the physical world like you said. And I have a sort of the same spiritual, you know, I I just don't know. How's that? I don't know.
Mhm.
I want to believe in a heaven. I want to believe in all that, but I know that there's a lot of conversation about, well, how do you, if somebody asks you if you have a sibling, I say yes. And sometimes I can say what happened, and sometimes I leave it right there.
Right.
Depends on my mood that day and who I'm talking with, because you know, mm, I I have found it important to protect my brother's story and his integrity.
Mm, yeah.
And it's still my job to protect my brother.
That's a big sis job. That's a
It
big
is. It's
sis
our job.
job.
It's our
It's our
job.
job. It's our job.
Our job.
And it's so important, and I feel like it's so important in sharing your story that we give that message to all of you listening, because it's okay to continue that job
Oh yeah.
and for the rest of our lives, because it's really important. And I love what you're saying though, Lori, because this is something that comes up a whole lot. This is like in the top 3 to 5 questions that we struggle with when we go through this loss, right? How many siblings do you have, or do you
Right.
have siblings, right? And I talk
Right.
about this on multiple episodes, but I never get tired of asking my incredible guests like you about this, because we all have similar but also unique responses to this. And I'm really blown away with you so early in your grief journey, because, there's people who are 10, 20 years into this and are just now opening up. And then there's some
Right.
people that are like, I'm ready now. Like, I'm going to open up. And it doesn't,
Yeah.
because we grieve for life. But
Right.
you're saying something, what you said was so beautiful, because you said that, it depends on who I'm talking
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
And that's something that took me, again, blown away by you, because that took me time. Because it was almost like trying on shoes, or like a coat, or, clothing, which I absolutely hate to do.
Me
I'm not
too.
that kind of person. I don't like try. I'm a clothing, like, again, we'll keep it PG, but I'm a
Right.
clothing, what.
Right.
And I
Right.
have so many shoes, but I don't want to try them on. I want to know my brand. I want to order them. And I want to be done with it. But
And I'll ship it back if it doesn't fit.
amen. Sister, yes. But
Yeah.
I don't want to actually do it. And so trying on these different responses was so
Yes.
freaking uncomfortable for me. And so I think you've just given such a beautiful piece of advice that took me years to get to. Really just feel within yourself. Who are you speaking to? Like,
Right.
you know, yep, I have a brother. Let's keep it moving.
Keep going.
I'm not comfortable with you. That's
Yeah.
kind of like, right? I mean, that's how I would perceive it and think about it, in my
That's exactly
opinion,
how it is.
right? But if somebody asks you and they're like, "Well, how many siblings do you have?" and and you can feel empathy from people. You can really, I feel like loss changes you to a point where you can really feel who you're safe with. And that's
Oh yeah.
something that changes things. So thank you for bringing that up because it's a question I get all the time. How do I handle this question? You need to navigate it yourself, but we can give you a lot of advice, but find out what fits for you. Find the shoe that
Exactly.
fits for you
I love
in
that.
that question. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is like that. And
Mhm.
also, like I said, protecting my brother's his story, his integrity, his protecting him. Not everybody doesn't deserve his story,
Mm.
you know?
Yep.
I'm talking to you because it's important for your audience and your listeners and other people that share the experience you and I share.
Yes.
It's something I never thought would happen in my life.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to be someone's gossip. My brother is not going to be someone's gossip. And so I'm pretty protective still, and I suspect I always will be
I
about
can
his story.
I can tell you just a few years ahead of you in this journey, and,
Yeah.
it's, again, I call grief a snowflake all the time because everyone is unique. Every story is
Yes.
unique, even though we can connect, because we've lost our brothers to homicide,
Mhm.
and that's a huge connection, but it's just really blown me away in doing these support groups and doing this show and doing so many things in this community as we continue to grow. There isn't a single sibling that has lost a sibling that I can't connect with on some level. And it's that unique, but at the same point we're all different. That's why I don't mean to make it too woo woo, but we really are all snowflakes and we have our own unique story. No two stories are the same. And I think respecting that and honoring that is really huge,
Yeah.
and important
Yeah.
in this process.
It is. It
Yeah.
is.
So tell us a little bit about what happened, as hard as this is, what
Mhm.
happened next with Brian as you continued on your you sound so much like me, on your mission, because
Yes.
we've got the car, we see all of these things going on. What
Yes.
was next? Did you guys do a celebration of life? Was there a funeral? Kind of walk us through
Yeah.
what happened
Yeah.
next. Yeah.
Well, what was next was talking to the deputy district attorney because, I skipped a big part. They caught him. They caught the guy about 6 weeks after, and,
How? What happened? Oh,
he
tell
was
us.
committing another
Oh,
crime.
oh
He was
gosh.
committing another crime. There had been, some people who spotted my brother's car. There'd been cameras. This is when Big Brother is kind of a good thing because
Mhm.
they were able to catch my brother's car on video cameras in the city, and, so then they had a description, and then they got called to a scene of basically a burglary. He was in a convenience store or something like that, and so he was committing another crime, and he was already a once convicted felon, so he was a real winner. 28 years old, real winner. But he was arrested, and I got another phone call, and it was it was the detective, and he said, "Hi, Lori, it's, Detective so and so," and I said, "You're only calling because you caught him."
You knew.
I knew. And he said, "That's exactly why I'm calling. We caught him." And I literally fell to my knees. I
Mm.
was home by myself, and, I fell to my knees and just cried out of relief, out of grief, out of anger. I mean, every emotion was bubbling. And he said, "Do you wanna call your parents and tell them?" I said, "No, you need to call. They need to hear it from you." And he made those next 2 calls. And so then probably a week later, I got a call from the deputy district attorney saying they were gonna press charges, and that's where the legal nightmare begins for anybody who is going through this or has gone through this. It took it took 15 months from the date my brother was killed to the date that the murderer was sentenced. It took 15 months, and that is nothing.
That was fast.
That was fast. But see, we were told, "Oh, it'll probably and the legal system calls it resolve because the case gets resolved." I mean, you're just nothing but a number, and it's so hard because, Brian wasn't a number. Brian was a human. He is a human. And yet the legal system treats you, you're just a case number. And but we got really lucky with our deputy district attorney. She was lovely and the most human person, but she said, "Look, we think it'll resolve quickly, 6 months because it's really cut and dry. Our witnesses are, cops and we have certain things and we're going to go for 17 to 20. We're going to go for murder 1." 15 months later, he got 12 years. It was voluntary manslaughter, and the legal system is kind of messed up.
Yeah.
So, we had that's a fast forward, but it was 15 months of every month there being a delay and the public defender just dragging her feet. And
Now, was this you? This was who was representing you guys, right? You had a public defender representing
the
you.
public defender was representing him. The district attorney
Wanted to clarify.
represents
Okay,
my brother and
representing you guys.
represents the
Yep.
state.
Wanted to clarify. Yep. Just so
Yes.
everybody knows.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry. Thank
Got
you.
it. Nope. No problem. Yep.
Yeah. So the public defender who represented the murderer, monster, whatever words I'd come up with at any given time, she dragged her feet because
Of course.
he's incarcerated. She'll get to it when she gets to it. Never mind, my family is literally going through legal purgatory. Like we're just
You're grieving. You're going
yes,
through legal hell.
yes,
Those are secondary things. I mean, you're grieving, right?
yes.
And for that particular person, I'm not saying public defenders are the worst people in the world. Like, please, if any of you guys listen to this, you're not the worst people in the world. But the
No,
reality is, when you have somebody that is guilty as sin and they're already incarcerated, they're not a priority for you.
that's
And so I
exactly right.
love that you're bringing this up because these are things that I get asked all the time because I did not even get to go to this part of the system, but I've been
Mhm.
so exposed to it
Right.
because of the work that I've been doing for a couple of years now. And so I love that you're sharing from your perspective. I hate that you've been through it, but
Yeah.
I love that you're able to share this with us
Yeah.
because this is very real. This is
Yeah. It's
very
very
real.
real.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent a lot of days just driving to the courthouse. And then I got to a point where I would say, do I even need to bother coming? And because if it's just going to be delayed, I don't want to see this person who took my brother's life.
Mm.
So I stopped going. My mom stopped going. My dad stopped going. We went to like the first one, the second one, and then it wasn't until the end that we started going again. But while that's happening, while this legal process is happening, now we need to, we did a celebration of life because my brother hated funerals. Like
Mhm.
he would not go. He avoided them like the plague. And so we said, okay, we're not going to do that. And so we did a celebration of life. And believe it or not, I know it's not a funny thing, but it's a little bit like a little giggle. There was a theme because I am a corporate planner. I'm an event planner. And so
I know, twin. I know. I get
my
it.
brother loves sports. And so the gal at the mortuary, she said, "Make it personal." And she recommended, like, we encourage people to wear jerseys of their favorite team. My brother loved
Oh,
the
I love that.
Dodgers. He loved the Lakers. He loved the Denver Broncos. So it and some people are like, "Is it okay if I wear my favorite?" I'm like, "Absolutely." But like the invitation so I could see how many people were coming because we had food. It was a ticket to a sporting event, so that it
Okay, so I'm totally geeking out over this and
I
love
know.
every part of this already because this is something I would do. I love this. Oh my god.
Yeah.
We are all about the details. All
The
about the details.
details,
I love
right?
that. Yes.
But at the same time, while that is making it special, I'm writing a eulogy. I'm writing an obituary. I'm
Right.
having to pick music. I'm having to put photos together. My parents are coming over at separate times because my parents are divorced. And like my mom and I are helping her make her picture boards. And my dad's coming over and I'm helping make him picture boards. So like we didn't even come together to do that kind of stuff. So there was that drama going on.
How did you navigate that? Because as you know from my story
Yeah.
so far, and what you've heard and thus far us connecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents are not that way, and I wouldn't expect them to be, but we become kind of the intermediary
Yeah.
in that situation. And so how did you navigate that? Because that is another top 5 question that I get
Yeah.
for this show, and also again in our support groups and stuff, Lori, is
Yeah.
complicated family dynamics. Because as you said earlier, and I've talked about as well, is it will either bring you close together, which is a beautiful thing, and I hear once in a
Sure.
blue moon, or it just pushes you way further apart because this is so traumatic. And you said that, or like it creates so much more,
Yeah.
right, in the family. And it's interesting to me when, parents are no longer married and they lose a child and the siblings get caught in that, because we assume even more responsibility because we're
Yes.
trying to make them amicable. So I'm curious if that was also, if
Yes.
you don't mind sharing kind of your
No.
experience with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when we decided to cremate my brother.
Mhm.
He had had several surgeries, and his body had kind of betrayed him. He had really bad back problems, and we're more cremation people if you're some kind of a person.
Yeah,
But
cremated my brother, so I'm with you.
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
it made more sense for us. And when we were sitting in my backyard talking about it, I just remember literally looking at my parents saying, I can't do this alone. I I need you to cooperate. I need you to, you know, cooperate with me on these things. Like, please don't fight me. Please don't just, I'll do a lot of it, but I need cooperation. And I got it. I got it. I mean, there's there's no love lost, let me just put it to you that way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But we got through it, and we're still getting through it, and we're still navigating. It My parents have been divorced for 43 years,
Right.
you know?
Mhm.
So I'm not changing anybody at this point.
Yeah,
It was just a matter of let's navigate this, together.
right. We're
And
we're
we're
family. Like,
still a
that's the
family.
we're family. You
Like,
guys don't have to love each other, you don't have to care about each other,
no.
but you procreated and you had
Yes,
2 children. Let's
that's
get
right.
it together for a little while here.
You're
This
gonna
is
do it for me,
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know?
Oh,
And
that is powerful,
oh,
Lori. Do
yeah.
it for me.
I'll
Yeah.
use those words.
Did you
You're
tell
gonna do
them that?
Oh, yeah. You're gonna do it for me
That's powerful.
because I can't manage this and losing Brian.
Right,
I can't do both. I
right.
just don't have it in me, So, like, everything that we did when it came to, like, picking out urns, which saying those words is just still baffling to me,
Mhm,
it still blows my mind. And no one argued about, remains were being divided by 3,
mhm.
period. I mean, it just was what it was. And so, at least in that regard, there wasn't any arguing. It's just more of an indifference.
And I think a lot of you guys will
It's
relate to that too.
yeah.
It can be an indifference, and I really am inspired by your strength in that, Lori,
Thank
because
you.
I and I hope you guys are too. I don't know how you couldn't be, because I didn't have that in me at that time to be like, I remember, and I do share this in the episodes, that I was like, I told my mom in a very poignant moment, as you guys have heard, and I'm sure you've heard, Lori. I was like, Mom, this is either going to rip us apart or pull us closer together. And she made that choice. And I still
Mm.
feel very strongly about that to this day. And so I'm just really blown away by that aspect of your story and your story of loss, where you were like, guys, come on, like, let's get it together. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta do this for me, because I didn't have those tools in me at that time. And I hope this is helpful to you guys, because what a way to put that out there, because it's not all about them. you are important too. Yeah.
And I couldn't do it alone. I needed their help. And they, you know what? They stepped up. I'm very proud of my parents. Of course, they were still very much comatose. Like a
Sure.
lot of stuff I was still managing. And, I was because they just couldn't. And I understand that. I do. I don't
But I
even
think,
know how I
Lori,
feel, but I don't know how they feel.
right. But I think just hearing what you're saying, though, because they were so or receptive enough, I should say this from what you're telling me,
Mhm.
to the words that you told them, right? You're
Mhm.
from your
Mhm.
heart, that it wasn't easy, that you had to
No.
step up and take care of everything, but it was like, okay, if they're going to respect me on this level, then I can do this. I can step up. I can create this celebration of life that's
Oh, I
sports
did.
themed, And so, when you have no choice, you do it, but sometimes these little wins, I don't want to say make it easier, but
Mhm.
make it more
Mhm.
palatable, I guess would be the
Right.
best way to say it off the cuff for
Right.
myself, thinking about it. So I do commend your parents for at least doing that
Oh,
because
they did.
that's huge.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. It was.
Yeah.
And the thing too during that time is I was lucky enough. I'm a partner in a business, and my business partner stepped up, and I took 3 months off work.
That's amazing.
And I don't, a lot of people don't have that benefit, and I understand that, and I'm, forever grateful. Um, so I was able. I had the time. I wasn't trying to balance work and all of this. I wasn't trying to manage this, and I was, finding a therapist, and I was starting, I found TCF, and I found the sibling grief group, which has saved my life. I found Jason,
Yeah.
and he's
We
become
love
my
you,
coach.
Jason. Yes.
Yes. He's become my
Yeah.
coach. And I
Mhm.
always thought when people said that they had a coach, I was like, "Oh, okay, you're so pretentious." I have a coach, and I'm not
Until you go
pretentious.
through something
That's
very
right.
specific that
That's
you
right.
need someone to help you. So I love that you're saying that. It's different. It's very
Mhm.
personable, right?
Yeah.
It's a personal thing. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and having a for me, going through this and then having this sort of hand reach out and help me navigate this, I think is the only reason I'm able to do this today,
Yeah.
because it is still so new.
Yeah.
And
And when we connected, I was like, "We don't normally have somebody on like this."
right.
And then when
Right.
we were connected through Jason, I think this is a testament to getting help and to reaching out
Yes.
and to doing that because it doesn't mean that you're not still very early in your grief process.
Right.
But again, I love my snowflake thing that I talk about all the time.
It's a
We're
good
all
one.
very different, right? I mean,
It's
like,
a good
no,
one.
it's just like people. No two people are the same. The grief is exactly the same way. And I think, it just is so unique. But I do see a commonality in people who really go all in to do the work
Right.
and go all in, whether that means a therapist, a coach, a group, whatever is going to be your outlet. Some people are religious, they want to go into
Right.
religion, like whatever it is for you. And that sometimes takes people 10 years to do. Sometimes I've known people that have done it in the first week or month. And I'm like, that blows my mind. I'm like, God, you are so advanced. I am inspired by you. And I think that's a beautiful thing about us as sibs and sibling lost people is that when we get to this place where we're starting to move through our journey, there's no comparison. It's
Mm.
inspiration.
Mhm. Oh,
We're
that's
like,
beautiful.
what? Right? I mean,
Yes.
because comparison is a thief of joy, right? You cannot compare two journey. You just cannot do it. And
Mm-mm.
I am, as we are both event planners, which is wild. I did not know that until we actually like got on our call.
I
But
know.
we're very type A people, and so
Yes.
I would beat myself up all the time. I'm like, why haven't I told his story yet? Why haven't I done this yet? And the beauty of your grief journey is everything will fall in line at the exact moment that it needs to. Just like you met your grief coach when you needed to, just like you got connected to me and we're sitting here
Yep.
telling Brian's story today. And you have to trust that journey. And it doesn't matter if it's 6 months, 6 years, 50 years, whatever it is, trust
Whatever
the
it
journey
is.
and don't be hard on yourself. Like
Right.
it's easier said than done because I beat myself up. So guilty is charged.
Yeah,
Guilty.
yeah. Yes. But it's true, everybody's journey is different. I
Yeah.
being a student of therapy, my mother is a therapist.
Oh,
And
interesting.
having
Okay.
yeah, a retired therapist, but having both parents firmly believe in therapy, I started looking for a therapist probably about 4 months after. I
Hmm.
I I I couldn't even function for the first 3 months, you know? I just
I mean, I
couldn't.
couldn't function for
And
the first year, so I'm blown
yeah,
away by you too. So,
yeah,
it's
so
all good.
I
Yeah.
knew that I knew I needed to get into it right away, and I saw a therapist, and I fired her after 5 sessions because she just wasn't for me, and it was
Okay,
because
Lori, I
go
want to pause you
yes,
there because
yes,
here's something I tell people all the time. A lot of you guys listening have told me, "Oh, therapy's not for me. This didn't work. Tell us why you fired your therapist because I think of therapy like dating. It's not always going to happen on the first. Do you meet your husband or your partner or your wife or
you're
on the first date? I
no,
mean, I hope you marry your high school sweetheart, but how many of us do that? Not many. So, right?
no,
So
not
I commend you so much for being so open about that. So tell us why you fired your therapist, if you don't mind.
yeah, no, I found somebody who allegedly
Mhm,
was a specialist in grief,
mhm.
and so I thought, "Okay," and I went to the first meeting, and it went okay. I
Yeah.
walked out like, "Eh," and then, I went to the second one. I was going once a week, and I went to the second one, and she talked a lot, and I thought, "Well, that's kind of unusual for the therapist to talk a lot," meaning she gave me examples of things that happened in her life, and I thought, "I've been in and out of therapy since I was 17. This is not normal." And instead of just calling it quits and listening to my gut and following my intuition, I went 3 more times. But on the last one, I had gone to my grief group, my sibling grief group, and I'd asked for some advice. And I said, this is what I'm experiencing. And one of my brothers, he said, "Well, why don't you try saying you need the following things." And we talked through it, and I wrote down my notes, and I went in like 2 days later, and I started to explain to her what I was looking for in therapy. And she just started talking over me. I'm like, "That's it. We're done." And I finished that one, and I'm like, "I'm done." I wrote her an email that night and said, "I'm done. I'm going a different path." I didn't know what my path was going to be yet. And boy, I never looked back. And like you, I feel like you have to interview people. She
Yeah.
was not a specialist in grief. She did cognitive behavioral therapy. Totally fine. Not what I needed.
It's extremely generic and it works for a lot of
Very
people, but
sure.
not for the grief is a whole different ballgame as we're talking about it,
And
right?
then
So yeah.
and then like having my brother murdered, that was a whole different the anger that I had going on inside of me. Like I
Oh yeah.
needed somebody who could help me with tools and somebody who could like kind of
Extract that out of you. How do I
yes.
get the anger out of me so that I'm not doing, at least in my case, and I'm sure there's not any sibling that I've talked to that has lost someone to homicide or something really horrific like that. And again, I don't believe in comparison. It's all horrific. But
Yes.
there's an anger that
Oh,
arises in us very early, right?
oh,
Because
yeah.
that's our go-to emotion. So having a therapist that can tap into that very quickly and say, okay, how are we extracting this? Are you an exercise person? Are you a meditation person? Are you and I'm just pulling stuff out, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
finding out who you are for your outlet, because that's a lot of energy living inside of your body that has to come out. And if that person does not know how to give you those tools, it's not a fit. Not a
Yeah.
fit. So I commend you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm curious, did she ever
yes.
respond to you when you wrote something to her?
All she said was good luck.
Interesting.
Because I said, "Please send me an invoice for what I owe you." Because thankfully my insurance was covering it. But
Thank God.
I just you know what?
Yeah.
I didn't even bother explaining why. I don't owe her an explanation. It
You
wasn't working.
don't.
I'm out. But we seem to feel like we owe people things, and I'm like, "Nope, I don't owe you anything." But
I
I
love that you
really
said that
encourage
too,
people.
though,
Yeah.
Lori, because we do feel like we owe people explanations, especially when we're in such a vulnerable state
Right.
where we're like,
Yeah.
oh, is it just me though? Should I keep seeing this person because they're
Yeah.
certified or they have a degree? If it doesn't feel right, leave it.
Exactly. And I'm going to share, I know that I won't get in trouble for my mother for sharing this. She found a therapist and the woman never said my brother's name.
Hmm.
The therapist never asked for my brother's name. And
Hmm.
my mom's like, "I'm done." She went to one informational thing. She's like, "Nope. If you don't ask me my child's name, you got to follow your instincts. And if it doesn't feel good, get out."
Hmm.
You would get out of a bad job, you would get out of a bad relationship, every therapist isn't an expert.
Right.
They just have a little more education.
Right.
So, yeah, I
And
just
sometimes they get into it and it's for their own personal reasons, and that's
right.
why they talk about themselves. But
It was
Lori,
so
that sounds like a whole other episode we could
it
do on
is.
that. Oh my God. I really wanted you to hone in on that. So thank you for being so vulnerable with that because
Yeah.
I can't, again, that's in one of my top fives. Like
Yeah.
that I hear from people, they're like, well, I went, it just wasn't for me and I'm not going to do it anymore. And I'm like, don't give up. Did you give up finding your partner? Did you give up dating? Did you give up finding friends? Like, please, I know it can be so, we both know it can be
Oh,
so difficult and it can be so disheartening and you can feel
right.
discredited and,
Oh gosh,
not
yes.
validated. But when you do find the right people to support you, you're like, oh, it was worth it. This was worth it. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can't give up.
No, I encourage people, like, you've gotta test drive these therapists, you know?
Yeah. Amen, sister. Yes. Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Well, I have asked you so many additional questions, so we're gonna go a little bit over because I want to
Okay.
know
Mhm.
if you're cool with that. I
Yeah.
want to know more about, of course, Brian, because I know there's so much
Mhm.
more to this journey. Can
Yeah.
you tell us? I obviously there was so much that happened. You guys were going to court and then you kind of
Yeah.
took a pause on going because it was back and forth. And
Yeah.
yes, 15 months is fast. And, some people listening to this, if you guys have been through this situation, it can be years and years and years.
Yes.
So, but I think what's so valuable about you sharing so vulnerably and the case being closed,
Mhm.
Lori, is that you're able to tell us a lot about the process. So can you
Yes.
kind of share with us, like leading up to the actual prosecution, like kind of paint a picture for us around that? Because I think people are quite curious what that looks like because there's so much i- in homicide, there's an additional anticipatory grief that happens, right? Because
Yes.
you're like, "Are- am I going to get justice? Is this
Ugh.
going to happen?" And you said it beautifully earlier. I don't believe in it. Justice does not exist.
Nope.
It's more about, fight the good fight, fight what you can, and work on your own grief because you're not really going to get that justice. But should these people be behind bars or, whatever is appropriate?
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
But I think it's about debunking this myth that like when you go to court and when you see the final sentencing, like I really would love to hear this from you because I
Yeah.
had to come to that resolution without going through that process. But
Whew.
I know that it's not a thing. Every single person I've talked to that has gone through this is like, no, there's no justice. You
No.
walk away and you still have this, but it doesn't mean that it isn't helpful to at least have this person serve time. So I really
Yes.
want to hear that from you, Lori. So I'm going to
Okay.
hand that over to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, and again, I'm just gonna talk about it from our experience, meaning my family's experience. Um,
please. Yeah.
we came to the realization probably about just short of a year that it would be in our best interest to offer a plea and to take the plea. We never went to trial. And the reason we chose not to go to trial, and the thing is, I shouldn't say chose because it's really not up to us. It was up to the county and the district attorney's office. And then it's them sort of hand feeding you why a plea is better, right? And for us, we agreed with them because it only takes one person and that monster is free. One person thinks that he's not guilty, and it's done, and there's no double jeopardy, right? You can't be tried again for for the same crime.
Mm.
And that's a pretty big risk. That's a really big risk. And the other thing was in our county, and I assume it's going to be like this everywhere, is if they take a plea, it's they can't appeal it because they're admitting guilt.
It's my understanding that is pretty standard.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'm only speaking from California.
Right.
So, he can't appeal. The only time they'd be able to appeal is if a law changes, and then it's retroactive to, everybody, which is silliness. But, the process is very emotionally exhausting. For me, I didn't feel like I could properly start grieving until the sentencing day, because it was like having this wound scab over, and every time there was a court date, it got picked open. It got picked open, and I just couldn't, like, I was healing sort of, and I was grieving, and I was working on myself, and I was doing the hard work with Jason and the grief coaching, but it wasn't really, it's not closure, because I don't believe in that either. I wanted I wanted the punishment, and I think that once I thought to myself, "Once that day comes, I'll be good, and I'll be able to grieve." Boy, that was wrong too. Because all punishment does, all that sentencing day did was, okay, now he's behind bars. He got 12 years, voluntary manslaughter. He has to serve 85% because he's a two-time felon, and in California, that's the law. Um and I thought, okay, that day we're going to do our victims impact statements, which is just guts you. Um, because you're living it all over again, and this idiot is 10 feet away from you.
And that's something, Lori, that I really did want you to bring up, because that's something that I never got the opportunity to
Right.
do, but I have mixed emotions about it. And I have heard from many sources, which is very creepy, that he knows and he's heard and he listens to the podcast. So yeah, I know who you are, creep. Anyway, but that's something that people ask me about all the time, and I will never sit here and go, "I'm a therapist, I'm a this,
Yeah.
I'm a that, went through this," or I no, I'm just someone that had a really horrific experience that was
Yeah.
extremely public, and I'm continuing to share your stories. And so I am really keen for you to share this with our audience, because I get this question a lot from people who have lost a sister or brother or more than one sibling, God forbid,
Mm,
to homicide. Should I do the statement? Should I do it? How do I manage it? Would you mind, as you're continuing to share, kind of some
sure.
advice on that? Because I think this is so powerful. Yeah.
I'm gonna do it from my perspective. For me, I needed to say something to that person.
Yeah.
I needed the court to know, but it also is part of the public record for if and when he is up for parole. And it needs, like, I needed to make sure, I needed to be my brother's voice, and I needed the court to hear. And we had 13 statements, because you can submit friends, you could submit family, and so we did. It wasn't just my parents and me.
Right.
We had 13 statements, so 10 other people besides my parents and me submitted statements. I would say I started writing my statement in October of last year, and I didn't get to deliver it until August of, this year. It
Which is 2023, if you guys are listening at another
2023,
time.
thank you,
Yes.
sorry. I
That's
started
okay,
writing it in
Lori.
October of 22,
Yeah.
and I delivered it in August of 23. It naturally had many iterations. I would keep a notepad next to me on the sofa, and as I was raging, I would start scribbling the writing, and I would say, like, "F you," and is it okay if I say that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, "F you, you blah, blah, blah," and I would,
Mhm.
like, get it out,
Mhm.
and
God, that's so healthy. What a good idea. Yeah.
so I just kept it next to me, and then I put it away once I started getting frustrated by how long it was taking,
Yeah.
and then when it was time to actually write it, I started fresh because I was in a different place. than I
Interesting.
was in October of 2022 to I I f I didn't finalize it till the night before, and
Oh. And what do
I
you mean by finalize it? Like, you kind of, like, took all of your drafts and wrote it fresh? Or, like, tell us what you mean by finalize.
I actually started new. I did reference my notes just so I wouldn't forget something,
Sure.
but I started over and it was, gosh, it was how many pages? It was 10 pages, 1.5 spaced. I decided to be a little more, visual, and I took a glass vase and I brought marbles, and I made different points, like the fact that the murderer was 45 pounds heavier than my brother. I dropped 45 marbles, and it made clink, 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 clink during my statement. The fact that he was 6 inches taller than my brother, I dropped 6 marbles. And I was doing this, and then I dropped a whole bunch of sand in it and said, like, "You can't count sand, you can't count tears." And it just envelops your life. And then I had a much smaller vase, and I said, "And here are the 12 marbles for his punishment." It's so unjust. And, yes, we opted for the plea because we wanted some punishment. And like I said, it's to me, it's not justice, it's punishment. And he needed to be punished because nothing will bring my brother back.
Yep.
Nobody can do anything. And I thought I would feel better at the end of that. I thought that on the 18th of August, I would be, oh, light as a feather. And instead, I stayed in bed for 3 solid I took the Thursday, the Friday, I took the Monday off, and I was basically in bed sleeping or crying. It was just I'm still processing
Right.
that because one of the things that Jason and I were working on is, I need to get this guy out of my head. He's been living in my head rent free for, all these months. And I thought, oh, on the 18th, he's going to move out. Well, he's like 75-80% moved out now.
Mhm.
He still hasn't transferred to state prison, so there's a part of me that is like, "Okay, once he's been transferred to state prison, then he's moved out." We'll see.
Yeah.
It's that trauma. It's but anyways, about the impact statement. If somebody is deciding, like, should I or shouldn't I would encourage do it because you don't wanna regret it, having not done it. And you don't at least in California, you don't have to read it. You can have an advocate read it, or you can just submit it. But have your voice heard is what
Mhm.
I would say,
I agree.
because you can't turn it in later.
Mhm.
I couldn't turn it
You
in
can't go
now.
back, right, you can't go back
Mm-mm,
with that. So even if it's,
mm,
I have a lot of people, it's also with eulogies and stuff too. They're like, "I regret not doing this." And like
mhm.
the reality is if you can't say it, that's okay, but make sure your voice is heard.
That's
And
what I would
I
say.
just
Mhm.
I love this. I didn't even realize we were this in line with this because and I love it. I love that because I agree with you 150% because some of us again, I mean, naturally, as humans, we go to, are we extroverted? Are we, more, introverted? And grief changes you, death
Oh,
changes you. So sometimes, like, I'll always be an extrovert, but I shut down in a lot of ways now that I didn't used to do. And I don't know that that necessarily defines me as an introvert in like a definitory way, but like I just see like myself and I look back and I'm like, I definitely wanted to do that. I definitely want and I would have gotten up and spoken. But if for
mhm.
some reason I couldn't have, there's no way in hell I wouldn't have um had someone at least say my words for me. And so I think your advice is just completely invaluable. I think it's so true because you will look back and regret those things and we can't go back and change. That's your moment. And even if it
It
can't
is.
be your mouth saying this, your vocal box
100%.
saying that, you have it in your soul, in your hand. You can write it, you can type it. And so I think, God, thank you for sharing that, because so many people ask that. And
Yeah.
I think
I would
it's so
definitely
important.
encourage, and like
Yeah.
I said, at least in my state, and I would imagine this is pretty universal, is that
Right.
you
It's
can
it's
have an
it's
advocate
most.
read it or
Yep.
somebody else read it for you, or you
Mhm.
can just have it turned in for the record.
Right.
Even if you can't say it out loud in court, because
Right.
a lot of people, one, have a hard time speaking in front of other people. I get it. Then you're in
Public
grief.
speaking. More people are afraid of public speaking than they are
Mhm.
of dying.
Dying.
Isn't that crazy?
Mhm.
But it's
Yes.
true. Yes,
Yeah.
it's true. And I can empathize with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you're another point that you just now brought up about being a different person, like, I have always been an extrovert, and now I would rather stay home with my dog, and I kind of can't be out in the wild with people anymore.
Yeah.
I'm still battling with my rage.
Yeah.
I'm still battling with it, but I'm
Yep.
trying to turn this into, well, I have turned some of it into something good. I took a course on how to be a certified victims advocate, and so
And that's
now
what I was
I'm
just about to ask you
certified.
about. So
Mhm.
perfect transition. So
Yeah.
that's your outlet in giving back, because
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit? This is a question I get a lot. It's not in my top, 3 to 5, but it's definitely in my top 3 to 5 for people who have gone through a homicide loss, right? What
Mhm.
is a victim's advocate? Can you share that a little
Mm.
bit, since you've just gone through this? Because I think that's
Sure.
amazing. Yeah.
So, in the court system, most district attorney's offices have an advocate for the family. It helps you navigate the process, explain what's gonna happen next. And these are I mean, these people are saints. They don't get paid well. They work crazy hours. They have multiple cases, multiple families. And what they do is they just help you navigate the legal system. What's next? What can you expect? And they do the best they can. I still think that in all in all, we weren't given the total honest. And I think they try to be aware of people's feelings, and they don't want to be harsh. I
Right.
kind of wish that they would just be harsh if that's what it means to be more honest. I don't think they were intentionally deceptive. Um, but what I decided to do was take a class, and I am going to maybe start volunteering to be an advocate for foster children, to be their certified court appointed, it's CASA, court appointed special advocate, and you get assigned a minor, and you help them navigate the process. So I actually have a training tomorrow between 10 and 11 a.m. to see if that's going to be a fit for me. But I need to give back. I need to give back in honor of my brother. My brother was an extremely giving human, and I need to continue his work.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That's why I wanted to make sure we brought that up too, because I think that's amazing that you're on that journey. And that's really what this show is about. It's about sharing just your vulnerable, complete, honest story about you, your sibling, the loss,
Yeah.
but also how are you giving yourself hope? How are you continuing to give that light of your brother, your sister, or
Yeah.
again, God forbid, I've had people on the show who have lost more
Yeah.
than one sibling. How are you continuing their legacy? And you're doing it already. Like, it's really, your story is very cool, because you're in like the middle of this process, right? Of like
Right.
bringing, like carrying the torch. And I think that's really amazing. And I connect with you too, because I'm extremely extroverted, but doing this kind of work, and also us doing our event work, you have to be extroverted all the time. And so I flip and enjoy sitting home with, I have two little girls that have been with me for a long time now, and we just love to sit outside, hang out. I enjoy a glass of wine with them,
Yep. Yep.
or we Netflix and chill
Yep.
together. I mean, they are my babies, and it's very cathartic for me. And I never really understood that level of needing to recharge and kind of
Mhm.
be. And I feel really connected with my brother Andreas during those times, and I'm sure you feel connected with
I do.
Brian during those
I
times
do.
too.
I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
I it's it yeah. I've just realized that I'm probably better off sometimes being at home because I can be a little bit I'm still like I said, I'm still working through a lot of rage.
Right. And I
And so
connect
being
with that because
home
I did too, and so, like,
yeah.
I really commend you for being aware of that because it took me well over a year, it was almost year 2 where I started to be like, "Holy crap, I'm really angry. Like, I'm
Yeah.
really angry, I need to not be around." And it wasn't that I didn't have the right to feel that way, it was about
No.
being self-aware about it. So, again, I'm inspired, and I hope you guys are as well. I can't imagine that you're not, that you're so self-aware about that because I think a lot of people don't realize because it's it's a lot of trauma
It's a
that you
lot of
go
trauma.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I wanna go back just for a second and then
Mm.
we'll kind of wrap up and talk about how to
Okay.
connect with you. God, you and I could talk for a
We
long
really
time.
could.
Little did I know we had this much in common. Oh my gosh. But Lori, when you were telling us, about, the sentencing and,
Mm.
everything that's happened and you were talking about, obviously this horrific, I'm just going to say it, horrific. I
Yeah.
try not to be judgmental, but in these situations, horrific gentlemen, don't you love how they
Gentlemen,
use
air
that term?
quotes. Yes.
Gentlemen. Yeah, if you guys are watching the video, you'll see that gentleman. I mean, that
Yeah.
that will stay with me forever in
Oh
my story.
god.
So,
It's with me,
when
and
they
it's your story.
right, but I'm sure you went through the same thing too, like in court when they humanize them or they call them
Yeah.
Mr. So and so and all that. I'm
Yes.
like, just call them Mr. A-hole or whatever, because I
Right.
mean, like, they don't even deserve a name. But
No.
anyway, that's a whole yeah, I mean, we all know this already. But, I think it's really interesting how you said, when he gets transferred here, I'll feel this, or when he and
Mm.
I feel like you're at a point where and this is a really important part of your story where you're like you feel like because I felt like this too. I'm like, well, when this happens and when this happens,
Right.
and I never got the opportunity to go to court and do those things, and it was completely, and my story is not uncommon. It happens all the time. Your
Yours
story
is
is not
more
uncommon.
common.
Mine is more common. It
Yours is
actually is.
more common.
Fun fact, ladies and gentlemen, yes, it's
Yes.
more common. Even though I fought my little butt off and
Mhm.
it was just, difficult. But I think the point of us and communicating with all of you about this is it really doesn't matter the outcome. The the only win in your story is at least for hopefully a decade, maybe
Mhm.
less, he's not able to do those things to anyone else. But that's really it. There's no
That's it.
justice. There's no
Mm-mm.
bringing back Brian. There's no bringing back
Mm-mm.
Andreas. And that's,
Nope.
people ask me all the time, they're like, how are you able to live with the fact that this guy is walking around and
Mm.
shot your brother in cold blood? And I'm like, because the reality is he would be out again. He would be out again. And, I've had to work through that on my own. And that's my own journey.
Mm.
But what I think was what I was getting to with your story is we have these milestones. We're always like, well,
Mhm.
when they go here, or when they get to this place, or when this happens. And I think what's really um just a standout with you is I think you've gotten to the point where you're like, no, it's not that. It's about what I do with this now.
Yeah.
And instead of holding on to these milestones because I did too. And I was
Yeah.
like, I gotta get all this paperwork. I gotta get the private investigator. I gotta do this. I gotta get them to court. I gotta get them to serve justice. I gotta chase this lead. It was just and I'm not I wouldn't change a thing about what I did. I wouldn't. And I'm
No.
sure you wouldn't either.
No, no,
Right.
no, no, no.
But it's about starting to sit with it and go, okay, this part of the chapter is over in a sense because they're never
Yes.
coming back. So, how do I honor Brian? How do I
Yes.
honor Andreas? And how do
Yes.
I live for them? Because that's what really matters.
Well, I would say that you're doing it with this podcast and shedding light on stories. That's what I would say to that. And I would say that I am endeavoring with this advocacy work. And it'll probably be volunteer work for a while.
Sure.
I have no idea what's next, but I know that I'm taking steps in the right direction. And I think what I told you when we were just chatting before this is that the weirdest thing that's happened to me is that the worst day in my life has created this chain of gratitude. finding TCF, finding Sib's group, finding Jason, now my advocacy, being able to talk to you on this podcast and spreading, the stories that you're doing. Like, it's a very strange, uh, positive that is coming from this. And I think I want to believe that our brothers are proud of us.
Yeah, they are. I know it 150%.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because um you're not the only incredible guest this season, as you'll hear as the season,
Yeah.
continues to evolve and as it comes out. Um, you're not the only one that says that this season. It's a big theme this season that
Is it?
everybody is talking. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I don't believe in coincidence.
I don't either.
Even if it's a really crappy thing that you've been through like us, or if it's something really incredible, there's no such thing as coincidence. And I will tell you, I would say 75% of the people that have been on this season have said something like you just said in their own interpretation, in their own
Yeah.
way, that what we would, I mean, if whatever you believe in, universe, God, whatever
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
practice, came before you and said, would you like your sibling to come back? Of course, we'd be like, heck yeah, bring them back right now. But
Yes.
that's not how life works.
No.
And so the reality is when you open, it's like I use a lot of metaphors. Lori, you'll learn this about me if you haven't already listening. But, it's like we want a certain thing to blossom or bloom or happen, but, maybe we're expecting a rose or a sunflower or this or that. But actually, when something really traumatic happens, we might actually look to the other side and this whole garden of other things happens and we're
Yes.
like, holy crap. I never would have probably known you without this, right? I just had
Nope.
this conversation with someone else. And you'll hear it on the season. And I've met so many incredible people and my relationships are so much deeper, I think, than they've ever been in my entire life. And that
Yes.
continues to evolve. And I would never thank the man that took my brother's life for that, but I thank my brother for that because I know that's my brother sending me them, and I know that's Brian sending that to you.
Yes. Agree.
Yeah. Where can we connect with you, Lori? Where are you comfortable connecting with people? Are you active on social media? Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, I probably Instagram is probably the best. I'm trying to curate that a little bit more, and you're gonna probably start seeing a few more posts about what I'm
Perfect.
doing next. And it's just really easy. It's just, Instagram.com/Lori Luna, LORILUNA.
Perfect. And we'll put it in the show notes too. So
Okay.
Instagram is perfect to connect with you. I love that. Lori, thank you for your vulnerability today. This is one of the hardest topics. I find that, you know, again, I'm not a fan of comparison. I think it's not only the thief of joy, but it's also the thief of grief. And it's
Yes.
also like the thief of validation, right? And so, but homicide, suicide, some of these really heavy topics. We're in some groups and some clubs I'd never wish on anyone. So thank you for really shedding a lot of light on this in such a raw and a death that happens so fresh. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
um
thank you for having this platform and creating this platform for
my
other
pleasure.
voices.
My
It's a
pleasure.
gift.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lori. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.